The appraiser's hands trembled as she set down her magnifying glass. "Ma'am, where exactly did you get this ring?" Her voice had dropped to barely a whisper. Behind me, my sister Madison's smug expression melted into confusion. 20 minutes earlier, she'd been calling it garage sale garbage and laughing about my pathetic taste in jewelry. Now the woman who'd spent 15 years evaluating precious gems was staring at my grandmother's ring like she'd just discovered buried treasure. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. Growing up in suburban Denver, Madison and I couldn't have been more different. She was the golden child, valedictorian, prom queen, full scholarship to Northwestern. I was the quiet one who preferred books to parties and thrift stores to designer boutiques. Our parents never tried to hide which daughter they were prouder of, and Madison never let me forget it either. When Grandma Rose passed away last spring, the family gathered at her modest cottage in Lakewood for the reading of her will. The house felt enormous without her warm presence filling every corner with the smell of fresh bread and stories about her mysterious past. She'd always been secretive about her life before coming to America, deflecting our questions with a smile and a change of subject. Most of her estate went to our parents, the house, her savings, the antique furniture that had somehow survived decades of family gatherings. Madison inherited Grandma's pearl necklace and matching earrings, pieces she'd always admired during holiday dinners. "These will look perfect with my wedding dress," she'd announced, already planning her engagement to her college boyfriend Trevor. For me, there was something unexpected. The lawyer handed me a small velvet box I'd never seen before. Inside sat a peculiar ring, ornate silver with what looked like a large cloudy stone in the center. It wasn't traditionally beautiful. The band was thick and masculine, clearly not designed for a woman's hands. The stone itself seemed almost gray in the dim light of the lawyer's office, with strange inclusions that made it look damaged or flawed. "Your grandmother specifically requested that Leslie receive this ring," the lawyer explained, reading from Grandma Rose's handwritten notes. "She wanted you to know it belonged to your great-great-grandmother, Elena." Madison snorted. Of course Leslie gets the weird, ugly ring. Grandma always had a soft spot for strays. Our parents said nothing, but their silence spoke volumes. I slipped the ring into my purse without much thought. It was clearly costume jewelry, probably worth $20 at most, but it had belonged to Grandma Rose, and that made it precious to me in ways Madison would never understand. Over the following months, I wore the ring occasionally, usually when I was missing Grandma Rose particularly strongly. It was too big for most of my fingers, so I wore it on my thumb or sometimes on a chain around my neck. The stone caught light in interesting ways, sometimes appearing almost blue or green depending on the angle. I found myself fidgeting with it during stressful moments at my job as a librarian, turning it around my finger while helping patrons or organizing returned books. Madison's engagement to Trevor was announced 3 months later with an elaborate party at the country club. Her ring was everything you'd expect, a flawless 2-carat diamond in a classic Tiffany setting, probably worth more than my annual salary. She made sure everyone got a good look at it, extending her hand dramatically when anyone came within 5 feet. "Trevor has such exquisite taste," she kept saying. "He knows I only deserve the finest things." I attended the party wearing a simple black dress from Target and Grandma Rose ring on my right hand. I thought it looked nice against the dark fabric, and wearing it made me feel like she was there with me, helping me get through another evening of Madison spotlight hogging. It didn't take long for my sister to notice. "Leslie, what is that hideous thing on your finger?" Madison's voice carried across the entire cocktail area, causing several heads to turn. Her friends giggled on cue. Sarah, her maid of honor, leaned in for a closer look. "Oh my God, is that supposed to be a gemstone? It looks like a dirty piece of glass." "It was Grandma Rose's," I said quietly, instinctively covering the ring with my other hand. "Grandma Rose had terrible taste then," Madison declared. "Seriously, Leslie, you're embarrassing our family wearing costume jewelry to my engagement party. Couldn't you have at least bought something decent for once?" The conversation moved on, but the damage was done. For the rest of the evening, I caught people glancing at my hand and whispering. Madison had made sure everyone knew that her sister was too poor or too clueless to wear appropriate jewelry to important events. This became Madison's favorite topic over the next few weeks. Every family dinner, every casual encounter, she'd find a way to bring up my tragic ring situation. She'd compare it unfavorably to every piece of jewelry she owned, which was considerable given Trevor's generous gift-giving habits and our parents' tendency to shower her with expensive accessories. "I just don't understand why you insist on wearing that thing," she said during Sunday brunch at our parents' house. "It makes your whole hand look dirty, and it's so obviously fake. I mean, what kind of gemstone is gray? It looks like a marble you'd find in a playground." Our mother nodded sympathetically. "Madison has a point, sweetheart. Maybe it's time to invest in some quality pieces. I could take you shopping if you'd like." "It's not about the money," I tried to explain. "It has sentimental value." "Sentimental value doesn't make ugly jewelry attractive," Madison shot back. "Poor Grandma Rose probably bought it at a church rummage sale and convinced herself it was special. She always was a little eccentric about these things." The criticism stung, but I kept wearing the ring. Something about it felt important, though I couldn't articulate why. Late at night, when I'd catch it reflecting my desk lamp's light, I'd think about the great-great-grandmother I'd never known, Elena. Even her name sounded mysterious and romantic. What had her life been like? How had this ring ended up in a modest Colorado cottage, passed down through generations of women who'd apparently never realized what they were holding? Madison's wedding planning kicked into high gear as summer approached, and with it, her commentary about my fashion choices became increasingly vicious. She'd recruited her entire bridal party to join in the mockery, turning every wedding-related gathering into an opportunity to point out my inferior taste in accessories. "At least hide that monstrosity during the wedding photos," she demanded during our final dress fitting. "I don't want people looking back at my wedding pictures and wondering why my sister was wearing a mood ring from 1987. That's when I decided I'd had enough. Not wearing the ring, I'd grown genuinely attached to it over the months, finding comfort in its weight and uniqueness. But I was tired of the constant ridicule, tired of Madison's assumptions, tired of being made to feel ashamed of something that connected me to my family's history. "You know what, Madison?" I said, surprised by the steadiness of my own voice. "How about we settle this once and for all? Let's take it to a real jeweler and get it appraised. When it turns out to be worth exactly what you think it's worth, I'll stop wearing it to family events." Madison's eyes lit up with malicious glee. "Oh, this is going to be fun. Trevor's family jeweler is downtown, Marcus Goldstein. He's appraised jewelry for celebrities and politicians. He'll take one look at that thing and confirm what I've been telling you all along." "Fine," I agreed, my heart pounding. "Tomorrow afternoon." What I didn't expect was how quickly Madison would spread the news. By evening, she'd texted our entire extended family about our appointment, framing it as the moment when her delusional sister would finally face reality about her pathetic fake ring. The next afternoon, we walked into Goldstein and Associates jewelry appraisers on 16th Street. The shop was exactly what you'd expect from a high-end establishment: thick carpets, soft lighting, and display cases filled with pieces that probably cost more than my car. Marcus Goldstein himself was busy with another client, so we were greeted by his associate, Dr. Patricia Henley, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an impressive array of diplomas on the wall behind her desk. Madison couldn't contain her excitement as we settled into the consultation room. "This should only take a minute," she told Dr. Henley with barely concealed glee. "My sister here thinks she's inherited some kind of valuable antique, but it's obviously costume jewelry. We just want an expert opinion so she'll stop embarrassing our family." Dr. Henley looked between us with professional neutrality, clearly accustomed to family jewelry disputes. "I see. Well, let's have a look at the piece in question." I slipped the ring off my thumb and placed it carefully on the velvet-lined tray she provided. For a moment, I felt strangely naked without it. I'd grown so used to its presence that my hand felt unbalanced. Dr. Henley picked up her jeweler's loupe and began examining the ring under her desk lamp. What should have been a quick assessment stretched into minutes of intense scrutiny. She switched to a more powerful magnifying glass, then moved to a specialized microscope. Her expression shifted from routine interest to focused concentration to something approaching disbelief. Madison fidgeted in her chair. Everything okay? I mean, there's not much to examine, right? Dr. Henley didn't respond immediately. She was now using what looked like a small electronic device, taking measurements and making notes on a legal pad. Her movements had become very careful, almost reverent. Finally, she set down her equipment and looked directly at me. "Ma'am, where exactly did you get this ring?" Dr. Henley's voice had dropped to barely a whisper, and her hands were trembling slightly as she set down her magnifying glass. Madison leaned forward eagerly. "See? I told you it was junk. She probably can't even figure out what kind of cheap metal it's made from." But Dr. Henley's expression wasn't one of dismissal. If anything, she looked like she'd seen a ghost. "I need to ask you to wait here for just a moment," she said, carefully placing the ring back on its velvet tray. "I need to consult with Mr. Goldstein immediately." She disappeared into the back office, taking the ring with her. Through the partially open door, we could hear hushed, urgent conversation. Madison's confident smirk began to fade as the minutes ticked by. "What's taking so long?" she muttered. "How hard is it to identify costume jewelry?" 20 minutes later, Dr. Henley returned with Marcus Goldstein himself, a distinguished man in his 70s with wire-rimmed glasses and an expression of barely contained excitement. He was carrying several thick reference books and what appeared to be professional photography equipment. "Miss Chen," he said, addressing me directly, "I hope you don't mind, but we've taken the liberty of documenting your ring with high-resolution photography. What you have here is, well, it's extraordinary." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Madison's face flushed. "Extraordinary? That gray piece of junk?" Mr. Goldstein opened one of his reference books to a marked page. The photograph showed a ring that was unmistakably similar to mine. The same ornate silver band, the same unusual stone setting. "This is the Maharaja's moon," he explained, "one of 7 matching rings commissioned by the Maharaja of Mysore in 1847 for members of a British diplomatic mission. Each ring contains a rare gray diamond, what gemologists call a ghost diamond, mined from the legendary Kolar mines before they were depleted." The room fell silent, except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Madison was staring at the book like it might bite her. "The diamonds appear gray or cloudy to the untrained eye," Dr. Henley continued, "but under proper lighting conditions, they exhibit an extraordinary phenomenon called agelarescence. They seem to glow from within with blue and green flashes. The inclusions that make them appear flawed are actually microscopic traces of ancient meteorite material, which is what gives them their unique properties." Mr. Goldstein turned to another page, revealing detailed historical documentation. Of the original 7 rings, 6 were lost to history. 1 was believed destroyed in the Indian Rebellion of 1857. 2 others disappeared during World War I. The remaining 3 were thought to be in private European collections, their whereabouts unknown. "But this would make it," I started, my voice barely audible. "The 7th ring," Mr. Goldstein confirmed, "the one given to Captain Edmund Hartwell of the British East India Company. According to our records, Captain Hartwell married an American woman named Elena Morrison in 1852 and emigrated to the United States. The ring disappeared from historical records after that." Elena! My great-great-grandmother's name was Elena. The pieces were falling into place like a puzzle I never knew I was solving. Madison found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "So it's actually valuable?" Dr. Henley consulted her notes. Based on comparable sales of similar historical pieces, and considering the rarity of ghost diamonds of this size and provenance, I would conservatively estimate the value at between $1.8 and $2.3 million. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Madison's face went through several color changes, red to white to green, before settling on a sickly pallor. My own knees felt weak, and I was grateful to be sitting down. "Million?" Madison's voice cracked. As in millions of dollars? The historical provenance alone makes it priceless. But yes, at auction, a piece like this would easily bring 2 million or more to the right collector. Museums would kill for something with this kind of documented history. I stared at the ring sitting innocently on its velvet tray, the same ring Madison had called garage sale garbage just hours earlier. The same ring she'd mocked at every family gathering for months. There's more, Dr. Henley said gently. The craftsmanship is museum quality. Look here. She pointed to tiny details on the band that I'd never noticed. These aren't random decorative elements. They're astronomical symbols representing the constellation Draco. And these smaller inscriptions are in Sanskrit. The ring wasn't just valuable jewelry, it was a diplomatic gift with deep cultural significance. Mr. Goldstein leaned forward. Miss Chen, I have to ask, are you planning to sell this piece? Because if so, I have several collectors and museums that would be very interested. The Smithsonian alone would probably make an offer immediately. I don't know, I stammered. I need time to process all of this. Madison had been unnaturally quiet, but suddenly she erupted. Wait a minute, this isn't fair. Grandma Rose didn't know what she was giving away. If she'd known it was worth millions, she would have split it between us or sold it and left us the money. Actually, Dr. Henley said carefully, there's evidence that she might have known exactly what it was. She showed us a small envelope that had been tucked inside the ring box, one I'd never noticed. Inside was a yellowed piece of paper with Grandma Rose's handwriting. For my dear Leslie, Dr. Henley read aloud, this ring has traveled a long journey to reach you. Elena kept it a secret to protect our family during harder times. I kept it for the same reason. Now it's your turn to decide what its story should be. Remember that some treasures are valuable not because of their price, but because of the love that preserves them. Trust your heart, not the opinions of others. All my love, Grandma Rose. Tears pricked my eyes. Grandma Rose had known. She always knew what the ring was worth, and she'd chosen to give it to me anyway. Not because I was her favorite, but because she trusted me to understand that its true value went far beyond money. Madison snatched the note from Dr. Henley's hands, reading it frantically. This doesn't make any sense. Why would she keep something worth millions stuffed in a jewelry box? Why wouldn't she tell us? Perhaps, Mr. Goldstein suggested gently, she was protecting it, and protecting your family. Objects like this can attract unwanted attention. Theft, fraud, family disputes. Maybe she felt it was safer hidden in plain sight. The implications of this hit me like a wave. For decades, possibly my entire life, I'd been living in the same house as a multi-million-dollar artifact. We'd all eaten dinner at the same table where this ring sat forgotten in Grandma Rose's bedroom. Madison had probably walked past it thousands of times, never knowing she was inches away from more wealth than our family had ever dreamed of. She chose you, Dr. Henley said quietly, looking directly at me. Out of all her grandchildren, she chose you to be the guardian of this piece of history. That says something significant about what she thought of your character. Madison's expression shifted from shock to something uglier, a calculating look I recognized from childhood whenever she wanted something I had. Look, Leslie, we need to be smart about this. This is family money, really. We should sell it and split the proceeds. I mean, what are you going to do with a $2 million ring? You work at a library. The dismissive tone was back, as if the last hour of revelations had never happened, as if she hadn't spent months humiliating me about this same ring, as if Grandma Rose's explicit wishes meant nothing compared to Madison's sense of entitlement. I haven't decided what I'm going to do with it, I said carefully. Haven't decided? Madison's voice rose. Leslie, be reasonable. You could buy a house, pay off your student loans, actually make something of your life. But you can't just wear it around like nothing's changed. Do you know how dangerous that is? What if someone tries to rob you? Mr. Goldstein cleared his throat. If I might suggest, Miss Chen, you should definitely get this properly insured immediately, And perhaps consider a safety deposit box for storage. Wearing it casually is inadvisable. I nodded, still trying to process everything. The ring that had been my daily comfort for months was apparently too valuable to live a normal life with. The irony wasn't lost on me. In gaining something priceless, I was losing the simple pleasure of wearing Grandma Rose's gift. We should probably discuss security arrangements, Dr. Henley added, and you'll want to have additional appraisals done for insurance purposes. This kind of discovery needs to be properly documented. As we made arrangements for the ring's temporary secure storage and scheduled follow-up appointments, Madison grew increasingly agitated. She kept asking questions about the sale process, about auction houses, about how quickly the ring could be converted to cash. Each question made it clearer that she saw dollar signs where I saw family history. Walking out of the jewelry store an hour later, I felt strangely empty-handed. The ring was locked in Mr. Goldstein's vault while insurance and security arrangements were being made. For the first time in months, my thumb felt bare and unfamiliar. Madison was unusually quiet during the drive back to my apartment, but I could practically hear the gears turning in her head. As we pulled up to my building, she finally spoke. "So what now?" she asked. "I mean, everything's different now, right?" I looked at my sister, really looked at her, perhaps for the first time in years. The same Madison who'd spent the morning laughing about my pathetic taste in jewelry. The same Madison who'd made sure our entire family knew about today's appointment so they could all witness my humiliation. "Yeah," I said quietly, "everything's different now." Word spread through our family faster than wildfire in August. By the time I got home from the jeweler, my phone was already buzzing with texts and missed calls. Madison had wasted no time calling our parents, our aunts and uncles, even our cousins in California. Everyone wanted to know about Leslie's $1 million ring. The first call came from my mother within an hour. "Honey, Madison told us the most incredible story. Is it really true? That old ring is worth $2 million? I confirmed the basics, trying to downplay the drama, but Mom was already in full planning mode. "Well, this changes everything. You'll need to call our insurance agent immediately, and maybe we should have a family meeting to discuss how to handle this responsibly." The subtext was clear. Responsibly meant getting everyone else's input on what I should do with my inheritance. My phone buzzed with a text from my Aunt Carol. "Heard the news, so exciting. We should all get together and figure out the best way to handle this windfall for the whole family." Then Uncle Jim. "Madison says you hit the jackpot. When you sell it, don't forget about capital gains taxes. I know a good accountant." My cousin Rebecca from Portland. "OMG, is it true? Mom says you're rich now. Can you pay for my wedding?" Even distant relatives I hadn't heard from in years were suddenly reaching out. Second cousins, great aunts, family friends. Everyone seemed to have advice about what I should do with our grandmother's ring. The most telling message came from my father. "Leslie, your mother and I think it would be wise if Madison helped you navigate this situation. She has more experience with financial matters, and this is really too big for you to handle alone." Too big for me to handle alone? As if I were still 10 years old, incapable of making decisions about my own life. As if Madison's business degree somehow qualified her to make choices about a historical artifact that had been specifically left to me. But the real chaos began 2 days later at Sunday dinner. What was normally a quiet family gathering had turned into something resembling a corporate board meeting. Madison had prepared what she called a presentation on my options, complete with printed spreadsheets and market research about auction houses. "I've been doing some research," she announced, spreading papers across Mom's dining table. "Sotheby's handles pieces like this regularly. Their next auction of important jewelry and precious objects is in October. If we get the ring cataloged now, we could see the proceeds by Christmas." "We?" I asked. Madison barely paused. "Well, you, obviously, but I think it makes sense for me to help coordinate the sale. I have experience with high-value transactions from my work at the investment firm. Plus, you'll need someone to help you manage the money afterward. Our father nodded approvingly. Madison's right. This kind of windfall requires proper financial planning. You could set up a trust, diversify the investments, maybe even buy some rental properties. What if I don't want to sell it? I asked quietly. The room fell silent. 7 pairs of eyes stared at me like I'd just announced plans to burn the money in the backyard. Don't want to sell it? Aunt Carol repeated. Leslie, honey, it's worth $2 million. You can't just keep it in a drawer. It's not practical, Madison added. You can't wear it. You can't even keep it at your apartment for security reasons. What's the point of owning something you can never use? Uncle Jim leaned forward. Think about your future, kiddo. $2 million, properly invested, could set you up for life. You could quit that library job, go back to school, travel the world. Or, Madison said, consulting her notes, we could consider dividing the proceeds among the family. I mean, Grandma Rose loved all of us. If she'd known what it was worth, she probably would have wanted everyone to benefit. There it was, the real agenda. Madison had moved from wanting to help me sell it to suggesting I should give away portions of the money to relatives who had never shown any interest in Grandma Rose's stories or her mysterious past. Actually, I said, finding my voice, Grandma Rose did know what it was worth. She left me a note saying she'd always known, and she chose to give it to me specifically. Madison's carefully prepared presentation seemed to deflate slightly. Well, she also might have been getting a little confused toward the end. Elderly people sometimes make decisions they wouldn't make if they were thinking clearly. The implication hung heavy in the air. Not only was Madison questioning Grandma Rose's mental capacity, she was suggesting that her final wishes shouldn't be honored because they didn't align with what Madison thought was fair. My mother jumped in as a mediator. No one's questioning Grandma Rose's decision, Madison, but Leslie, sweetheart, you have to admit this is a big responsibility. Maybe it would be helpful to have Madison's input, at least for the practical matters. I've already handled the practical matters, I said. The ring is insured and secured. I've scheduled additional appraisals. I'm consulting with experts about its historical significance. But what's your long-term plan? My father pressed. You can't leave it sitting in a vault forever. The truth was, I didn't have a long-term plan yet. The discovery was still too new, too overwhelming. But I was beginning to realize that my family's sudden, intense interest in my inheritance had nothing to do with my well-being and everything to do with their own financial fantasies. The conversation continued for another hour, with various relatives offering increasingly creative suggestions for how I should handle the situation. Madison's boyfriend Trevor even chimed in with advice about tax shelters and offshore accounts, as if we were discussing drug money rather than a family heirloom. Finally, I excused myself and drove home, feeling more exhausted than I had since Grandma Rose's funeral. The ring that had once brought me comfort and connection to my family's history had somehow become a source of division and greed. That evening, I called Mr. Goldstein's office and arranged to visit the ring the next day. I needed to see it again, to remember why it had mattered to me before I knew its monetary value. The jewelry store was quiet on Monday afternoon. Dr. Henley led me to a private viewing room where the ring waited under soft lighting. Seeing it again, I was struck by how different it looked now that I knew its true nature. The gray stone seemed less cloudy and more mysterious. The silver band showed details I'd never noticed, tiny engravings that caught the light like whispered secrets. "How are you handling all of this?" Dr. Henley asked gently. "Honestly, I'm not sure. My family seems to think I should sell it immediately and distribute the money. They're treating it like I won the lottery instead of inheriting something meaningful." She nodded knowingly. "We see this often with significant discoveries. Families can become complicated when large sums are involved. But I have to ask, what do you want to do?" It was the first time anyone had asked me that question without immediately following it with suggestions or pressure. I want to understand it better. The history, the connection to Elena, how it ended up with Grandma Rose. I feel like there's more to learn. There usually is, Dr. Henley agreed. If you're interested, I have a contact at the Denver Art Museum who specializes in colonial-era artifacts. She might be able to help you research the American branch of the story. As I held the ring again, feeling its familiar weight in my palm, I made a decision that surprised even me. I'm not selling it. Not now, maybe not ever. Even with all the family pressure, especially because of the family pressure. Grandma Rose trusted me with this for a reason. She could have sold it herself if she'd wanted the money. She could have split it up or donated it to a museum. But she gave it to me, and she left me that note about trusting my heart instead of other people's opinions. Dr. Henley smiled. What will you tell your family? The truth, that it's not for sale. When I announced my decision at the next Sunday dinner, the reaction was predictably dramatic. Madison accused me of being selfish and short-sighted. My parents worried about my financial future. Various relatives suggested I was making a mistake I'd regret for the rest of my life. But something interesting happened over the following weeks. As my family's initial excitement faded, and they realized there would be no windfall to share, most of them stopped calling. The distant relatives who had suddenly become so interested in my well-being disappeared back into their own lives. Even some closer family members seemed to cool their enthusiasm for family gatherings when it became clear I wasn't changing my mind. Madison, however, wasn't giving up so easily. Her approach shifted from direct pressure to subtle manipulation. She started bringing up my financial struggles, my student loans, my small apartment, my aging car. She'd casually mention investment opportunities or expensive experiences I was missing out on by keeping the ring. I saw the cutest condo for sale in Cherry Creek, she'd say over coffee. 2 bedrooms, granite counters, mountain views, only $1.8 million. Perfect for someone with your newfound assets. Or, Trevor's company is going public next year. Early investors could see massive returns, but I guess you're not in a position to take advantage of opportunities like that. The message was always the same. I was wasting a chance at a better life because of sentimental attachment to an object I couldn't even wear or display. But as the months passed and the initial shock wore off, I began to understand something my family didn't. The ring's true value wasn't in its price tag. It was in the story it told, the connection it represented, the trust Grandma Rose had placed in me to be its guardian. I started researching Elena Morrison Hartwell, tracing her journey from British India to Colorado Territory. I learned about the challenges she faced as an immigrant woman in the 1850s, the courage it took to start a new life in an unknown land while carrying such a precious secret. The ring wasn't just valuable jewelry. It was a piece of history, a symbol of survival, a link between generations of women who had faced their own challenges with grace and strength. And for the first time since the appraisal, I felt like I truly understood why Grandma Rose had chosen me to carry on that legacy. 3 months after the appraisal, I received an unexpected call from Dr. Sarah Martinez at the Denver Art Museum. Dr. Henley had connected us, and Dr. Martinez had been quietly researching the American provenance of the Maharaja's moon. Miss Chen, I've uncovered some fascinating information about your ancestor Elena Morrison Hartwell. Could we meet? I think you'd be very interested in what I found. We arranged to meet at the museum's research library the following Saturday. Dr. Martinez was a woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an infectious enthusiasm for historical detective work. She had spread dozens of documents across a large table: ship manifests, newspaper clippings, land deeds, and what appeared to be personal correspondence. Elena Morrison was quite remarkable, she began, pointing to a faded photograph of a stern-looking woman in Victorian dress. She and Captain Hartwell arrived in New York in 1853, then made their way to Colorado Territory during the gold rush. But they weren't prospectors. Captain Hartwell had been hired as a security consultant for mining operations. She showed me a newspaper clipping from 1855. Local businessman Edmund Hartwell establishes security firm. The article described how Hartwell's military experience in India had made him valuable to mine owners concerned about theft and claim jumping. Elena established herself as a dressmaker and eventually opened a boarding house in what's now downtown Denver. She was apparently quite successful enough to purchase substantial property holdings under her own name, which was unusual for women at that time. Dr. Martinez handed me a property deed dated 1862. Elena Morrison Hartwell was listed as the sole owner of a boarding house, a dress shop, and 3 residential lots. She was building wealth independently, but she was also extremely secretive about her background. Most of her neighbors believed she was from Boston. Why the deception? I asked. This is where it gets interesting. Dr. Martinez pulled out a collection of letters tied with a faded ribbon. These were donated to our archives by a family in Boulder. Their correspondence between Elena and her sister back in England. Elena mentions several times that she's keeping the captain's gift safe until the children are grown, and that she fears unwanted attention from those who might remember our time in Mysore. The implications were startling. Elena had been actively hiding the ring's existence, even from her own children. She understood that owning such a valuable artifact could make her family a target. There's more, Dr. Martinez continued. In 1867, Elena received a visitor, a man claiming to be a representative of the British East India Company. According to her letters, he was asking questions about Captain Hartwell's service and any artifacts or gifts that might have accompanied him to America. Elena turned him away, claiming to know nothing about her late husband's military service. Captain Hartwell had died in a mining accident in 1864, leaving Elena a widow with 3 young children. She'd continued running her boarding house and building her property empire, all while protecting a secret that could have changed her family's circumstances dramatically. So she chose poverty over risk? I asked. Not poverty exactly, but certainly a more modest life than she could have afforded. Look at this. Dr. Martinez showed me another letter, dated 1869. In Elena's careful handwriting, she wrote to her sister, "The ring remains hidden, as it must. I have seen what greed does to families, how it tears apart bonds that should be sacred. My children will inherit my work ethic and my love, not the burden of explaining wealth they did not earn." Reading those words felt like hearing an echo across generations. Elena had made the same choice I was making, preserving family bonds over pursuing maximum financial gain. But Dr. Martinez wasn't finished. Here's the most interesting part. Elena didn't just hide the ring, she created an entire false history for it. She told her children it was her grandmother's wedding ring from Ireland, a family heirloom of sentimental value only. That story was passed down for 5 generations. Until Grandma Rose. Exactly. Your grandmother must have discovered the truth somehow, but she chose to continue Elena's tradition of secrecy. She protected your family the same way Elena did. As I absorbed this information, I realized that Madison's accusation about Grandma Rose being confused was completely wrong. Both Elena and Grandma Rose had made deliberate, calculated decisions to hide the ring's true value. They weren't confused or naive. They were protective. Dr. Martinez had one final surprise. There's actually a small exhibit at the Colorado History Museum about Elena Hartwell. She's recognized as one of Denver's early female entrepreneurs. Would you like to see it? 2 hours later, we stood in front of a display case containing photographs, documents, and artifacts from Elena's life. A placard described her as a pioneering businesswoman who helped establish Denver's early hospitality industry. There was even a photograph of her boarding house, a 3-story Victorian building that had stood where a downtown office complex now sits. But what struck me most was a quote from Elena taken from one of her letters. "True wealth lies not in what we own, but in what we choose to preserve for those who come after us." Standing there, looking at evidence of my great-great-grandmother's remarkable life, I felt a connection I'd never experienced before. Elena hadn't been just a name in family stories. She'd been a real woman who'd made difficult choices, built a life from nothing, and created a legacy that had somehow survived to reach me. That evening, I called Madison to share what I'd learned. I thought she might be interested in our family's real history, the story behind the ring that went far deeper than its monetary value. "That's fascinating," Madison said when I finished explaining Elena's story. "So she was actually pretty wealthy from her businesses, which proves my point. We come from a family of smart investors. Elena would probably want us to sell the ring and invest the money wisely, just like she did with her properties. I was stunned. Madison had listened to the entire story. Elena's sacrifice, her deliberate choice to hide the ring, her protection of the family secret, and somehow twisted it into justification for doing exactly what Elena had refused to do. Elena specifically chose not to use the ring's value. She could have sold it at any time, but she didn't. That was different, Madison replied dismissively. She was worried about criminals and government agents. We don't have those concerns now. The smart thing to do is liquidate the asset and diversify. It was like talking to a wall. Madison was so focused on the financial opportunity that she couldn't see the historical significance, the family tradition, or the trust that had been placed in me. But her response clarified something important for me. I wasn't just choosing between keeping or selling a valuable object. I was choosing whether to continue a family tradition of wisdom and restraint or to break a chain of guardianship that had lasted over 150 years. The following week brought an unexpected development. I received a formal letter from a law firm representing Madison. She was contesting Grandma Rose's will, claiming that the ring should be considered part of the estate's general assets rather than a specific bequest. The letter argued that Grandma Rose couldn't have made an informed decision about the ring's distribution because she failed to disclose its true value to other potential beneficiaries. It requested that the ring be appraised as part of the overall estate and divided according to Colorado inheritance law. I stared at the legal letterhead in disbelief. My own sister was suing me for a ring she'd spent months mocking as worthless garbage. The same ring she'd called embarrassing and pathetic was now worth fighting over in court. The lawsuit changed everything. What had been family pressure and emotional manipulation was now a legal battle that could drag on for months or years. Madison was no longer just asking me to share, she was demanding that a judge force me to give up what Grandma Rose had specifically left to me. I called the lawyer whose name Dr. Henley had given me for estate planning advice. Janet Williams was a specialist in inheritance disputes, and she listened to my story with professional calm. "Your sister's case is weak," she assured me. "The will is clear, the bequest is specific, and your grandmother's mental capacity at the time of writing is well documented. But inheritance litigation can be expensive and emotionally draining, even when you're likely to win. What are my options? Fight it, settle it, or try to resolve it through family mediation. Given the amounts involved, I'd recommend fighting it. Your grandmother's wishes should be respected." As I left Janet's office, I realized that the ring had become more than just an heirloom or even a valuable artifact. It had become a test of whether I was strong enough to stand up for what was right, even when it meant standing up to my own family. Elena had faced down British government agents to protect her family's future. Grandma Rose had kept the secret for decades, trusting that the right person would eventually understand its true meaning. Now, it was my turn to be worthy of that trust. The lawsuit created a rift in our family that went far beyond Madison and me. Within days, relatives were choosing sides like generals picking armies before a civil war. My parents, predictably, supported Madison's legal challenge, claiming they just wanted fairness for everyone involved. "We're not taking sides," my mother insisted during a tense phone call. "We just think Grandma Rose would have wanted both her granddaughters to benefit equally." But they were taking sides, and their choice became clear when they hired their own attorney to join Madison's case. Uncle Jem and Aunt Carol followed suit, arguing that as Rose's children, they had a right to contest the will's provisions. The family that had gathered so warmly for Sunday dinners was now split into opposing legal camps. The only relative who refused to get involved was my great-aunt Dorothy, Rose's younger sister, who lived in a nursing home in Boulder. At 92, Dorothy was sharp as a tack and had no patience for what she called this ridiculous money grab. Rose knew exactly what she was doing, Dorothy told me during my visit to Sunset Manor. She talked to me about that ring several times over the years. She said you were the only one who understood that some things are more important than money. Dorothy's weathered hands shook slightly as she reached into her nightstand drawer. "Rose asked me to give you this if anyone ever challenged her decision." She handed me a sealed envelope with my name written in Grandma Rose's familiar handwriting.
Inside was another letter dated just 6 months before Rose's death.
My dearest Leslie, if you're reading this, it means my wishes have been questioned by those who should know better. I want you to know that I spent many years deciding who should inherit Elena's ring. I watched my grandchildren grow up, observed their values, their priorities, their hearts. Madison is brilliant and successful, but she measures worth in dollars and prestige. You measure it in love and meaning. The ring belongs with someone who understands its true value. Don't let anyone convince you that sentiment is weakness. It's the strongest force in human nature. All my love, Grandma Rose. Reading those words in Dorothy's quiet room, I felt a steel resolve settle in my chest. Rose hadn't made a spontaneous or confused decision. She'd observed, considered, and chosen deliberately. The family's lawsuit wasn't just challenging her will, it was questioning her judgment and wisdom. But Madison's legal team wasn't giving up easily. They'd hired Barrett, Newman and Associates, an expensive firm that specialized in high-stakes inheritance disputes. Their strategy became clear during the first deposition. They were going to argue that Rose had been suffering from early-stage dementia when she wrote her will. Madison's attorney, a sharp-dressed woman named Linda Barrett, presented medical records showing that Rose had been prescribed medication for mild cognitive impairment 8 months before her death. She'd also gathered testimony from neighbors who claimed Rose had seemed forgetful and confused in her final year. Mrs. Chen was clearly not in full possession of her faculties when she made this significant request, Barrett argued during a preliminary hearing. The disparity in value between the ring and other bequests suggests impaired judgment. It was a calculated attack on Rose's memory and mental capacity. I watched Madison sitting beside her lawyer, stone-faced and determined, apparently comfortable with destroying our grandmother's reputation to get what she wanted. My attorney, Janet Williams, countered with Rose's medical records from her primary physician, showing clear mental acuity right up until her final illness. She also produced the detailed financial planning Rose had done in her last years, including careful organization of all her documents and assets. Mrs. Chen was sharp, organized, and very deliberate in her final arrangements, Janet told the court. The idea that she was confused or impaired is contradicted by extensive evidence of her continued mental clarity. The legal battle stretched through the summer and into fall. Discovery requests, depositions, expert witness preparations, it consumed months of my life and thousands of dollars in legal fees. Worse, it poisoned every family interaction. Madison and I couldn't be in the same room without lawyers present. Sunday dinners became a thing of the past. The case took an unexpected turn in October when Barrett's team made a crucial mistake. During Madison's deposition, they asked her to describe her relationship with the ring before the appraisal. Madison, apparently forgetting that everything was being recorded, gave a detailed account of how she'd mocked it at every opportunity. "I mean, it was obviously worthless," she said on record. "I told Leslie repeatedly that she was embarrassing the family by wearing it. I called it garbage, costume jewelry, completely ridiculous. I made jokes about it to everyone." Janet later told me this testimony was like striking gold. Your sister just proved that she had no interest in the ring when she believed it was worthless. It's going to be very hard for her to convince a judge that she deserves it now that she knows it's valuable. But the real breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Dr. Martinez called me in November with exciting news. She'd been contacted by a genealogy researcher in London who'd been tracking the 7 Maharajas' moon rings for decades. His name is Professor Edmund Hartwell Morrison, Dr. Martinez explained. He's a descendant of Captain Hartwell's brother and has been researching the family history for his doctoral dissertation. He has documentation that proves Captain Hartwell specifically intended the ring to pass through the female line of his family. Professor Hartwell Morrison flew to Denver 2 weeks later, bringing with him a collection of documents that would change everything. He was a soft-spoken man in his 60s with an obvious passion for historical accuracy.
Captain Hartwell kept detailed journals during his service in India, the professor explained. He wrote extensively about the diplomatic mission and the rings given by the Maharaja. More importantly, he documented his decision about the ring's future.
He showed us a journal entry dated March 15th, 1852, written in India. The Maharaja has honored us with extraordinary gifts. Mine shall go to Elena, with instructions that it should pass to the daughters of our line. The women of our family have shown greater wisdom in preserving what matters most. Another entry, written after their arrival in America, Elena understands the ring's significance better than I ever could. She will know when and how to pass it on. I trust her judgment completely. Captain Hartwell deliberately established a matrilineal inheritance pattern, Professor Hartwell Morrison explained. He believed women were better guardians of family treasures. This tradition was followed for 5 generations until it reached your grandmother. The professor had also tracked down 2 of the other surviving Maharaja's moon rings. One belonged to a private collector in Switzerland who'd purchased it at auction for 2.4 million euros. The other was in the British Museum, acquired from an estate sale for £1.8 million. Your ring is actually the most historically significant of the surviving pieces, he told me, because it's the only one that remained with the original family line. The others lost their provenance when they entered the art market. Armed with this new evidence, Janet filed an amended response to Madison's lawsuit. We now had proof that the ring was meant to pass through the female line, that Rose had followed a 170-year-old family tradition, and that the ring's value was enhanced by its unbroken chain of custody. The hearing was scheduled for December 15th. As the date approached, Madison's legal team became increasingly desperate. They offered to settle for half the ring's value, then a third, then 25%. Each offer was presented as a generous compromise that would keep the family together. But I'd learned something important during those months of legal warfare. Sometimes keeping a family together isn't worth preserving if that family is built on greed, manipulation, and disrespect for those who came before us. 3 days before the hearing, I received an unexpected visitor at my apartment. Madison stood outside my door, alone, looking tired and older than I remembered. "Can we talk?" she asked quietly. "Without lawyers, without family, just us?" I let her in, curious about what she could possibly say at this point. We sat in my small living room, the space between us feeling like an ocean of hurt and betrayal. "I know you think I'm just being greedy," Madison began, "but that's not what this is about, not entirely." "Then what is it about?" Madison was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. "Do you remember when we were kids, how Mom and Dad always compared us? How I was always the successful one, the one who did everything right?" I nodded, not sure where she was going with this. "I built my whole identity around being the favorite, the achiever, the one who got the good things. And then Grandma Rose gave you something worth more than everything I've ever earned, and I couldn't handle it." For the first time since this ordeal began, Madison sounded genuinely vulnerable, but I'd learned not to trust her emotional appeals. "So you decided to sue me and destroy Grandma Rose's reputation?" "I made a mistake," she admitted, "a terrible mistake, but I don't know how to stop it now without looking like I was wrong about everything." I studied my sister's face, looking for signs of manipulation or calculation. What I saw instead was someone who'd built her self-worth on external validation and couldn't cope with being excluded from the biggest windfall in our family's history. "You could drop the lawsuit," I said simply, "and admit that Grandma Rose was right to choose you over me." "Maybe Grandma Rose wasn't choosing me over you. Maybe she was choosing someone who would understand the responsibility that comes with that ring." Madison looked up at me, tears threatening at the corners of her eyes. "What responsibility?" "To be worthy of the trust that Elena and Rose placed in whoever came next. To understand that some things are more valuable than money." For a moment, I thought I saw understanding flicker in Madison's expression, but then she straightened up and her familiar mask of confidence slipped back into place. "I can't just walk away from this, Leslie. Too much has happened. Too many people are involved now."
As she left my apartment that night, I realized that Madison had become trapped by her own choices. She'd started this fight out of wounded pride and greed, but now she was locked into a legal battle she couldn't abandon without admitting she'd been wrong from the beginning.
The hearing was 3 days away, and I was finally ready to fight for what Rose had entrusted to me. December 15th arrived with an unexpected snowstorm that blanketed Denver in pristine white. I stood at my apartment window watching the flakes fall, thinking about how different everything looked when covered in snow. The same landscape transformed into something entirely new. The Jefferson County Courthouse was buzzing with activity despite the weather. Word had somehow leaped about the case, and several local reporters were present, drawn by the story of a multi-million-dollar family heirloom hidden for generations. Professor Hartwell Morrison had flown in from London to testify, and Dr. Martinez was prepared to present her historical research. Madison arrived with an entourage, her parents, Uncle Jim, Aunt Carol, and 3 attorneys from Barrett, Newman and Associates. They looked like a corporate takeover team preparing to acquire a small business. I sat with Janet Williams and Dorothy, who had insisted on attending despite her age and the weather. "I want to see this nonsense put to rest once and for all," Dorothy had declared. Judge Patricia Hawkins was a stern woman in her 50s with a reputation for cutting through legal theatrics to focus on facts. She listened impassively as Linda Barrett presented Madison's case, arguing that Rose's bequest was the product of diminished mental capacity and that the ring should be treated as a general estate asset. "Your Honor, the evidence clearly shows that Mrs. Rose Chen was suffering from cognitive decline when she made this will. The dramatic disparity in value between bequests suggests impaired judgment. My client and her family are simply seeking fair distribution of what is, in effect, a lottery ticket that Mrs. Chen didn't know she was giving away." Barrett presented medical records, testimony from neighbors, and expert witnesses who'd never actually examined Rose, but were prepared to diagnose dementia based on secondhand accounts. It was a professional, well-orchestrated attack on my grandmother's memory and mental capacity. Then Janet stood to present our case. She started with Rose's actual medical records, financial documents, and testimony from Rose's doctor, who confirmed her mental clarity until her final illness. "Your Honor, Mrs. Rose Chen was not confused or impaired. She was deliberate, thoughtful, and following a family tradition that spans 5 generations. The plaintiff has presented no credible evidence of mental incapacity because no such evidence exists." Professor Hartwell Morrison took the stand next, explaining the historical significance of the matrilineal inheritance pattern established by Captain Hartwell in 1852. He presented the captain's journals, genealogical charts, and documentation proving that Rose had followed a 170-year-old family tradition. "This wasn't a casual request," he testified. "It was the continuation of a deliberate pattern established by Captain Edmund Hartwell himself. Mrs. Chen was honoring her ancestors' explicit wishes about how this ring should be passed down." Dr. Martinez followed with evidence of Elena Morrison Hartwell's deliberate concealment of the ring's value and her own written instructions about preserving it for future generations. She read Elena's letter about true wealth being what we preserve for those who come after us. But the most damaging testimony came from an unexpected source. During cross-examination, Barrett made the mistake of calling Madison to the stand to reinforce her claim that Rose had been confused about the ring's value. "Mrs. Patterson, did your grandmother ever indicate that she knew this ring was valuable?" Barrett asked. "No, never. She always treated it like costume jewelry. She kept it in a regular jewelry box with her other inexpensive pieces." "And what was your impression of the ring before the appraisal?" Madison hesitated, clearly remembering her deposition testimony. I thought it was worthless." "Can you be more specific about your feelings toward this ring?" This was where Madison's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Under oath, she had to repeat her months of mockery and ridicule. She testified about calling it garage sale garbage, about mocking my pathetic taste in jewelry, about telling everyone at her engagement party that I was embarrassing the family by wearing it. "Did you ever express any interest in inheriting this ring yourself?" Barrett asked.
No, of course not. Why would I want something so ugly and worthless? Janet's cross-examination was devastating. Mrs. Patterson, if you believed this ring was worthless costume jewelry, why are you now fighting so hard to obtain it? Because it turned out to be valuable. So your interest in the ring is purely financial? I think the family should benefit equally. But you just testified that you actively mocked your sister for wearing this ring. You called it garbage and claimed it embarrassed your family. Is that correct? Yes, but I didn't know.
You didn't know it was valuable, so if it had remained worthless, you would have been content to let your sister keep the garbage, as you called it? Madison's composure finally cracked. Look, I made some comments I shouldn't have made, but that doesn't change the fact that Grandma Rose didn't know what she was giving away. Actually, Mrs. Patterson, we have evidence that your grandmother knew exactly what she was giving away. Janet presented Rose's final letter to me, the one Dorothy had kept sealed. This letter, written 6 months before your grandmother's death, specifically states that she observed your values and your sister's values over many years before making her decision. As Janet read Rose's words about measuring worth in love versus dollars, I watched my parents' faces change. For the first time, they seemed to understand that Rose's decision hadn't been casual or confused. It had been a considered judgment about her granddaughter's characters. The final blow came when Janet called me to testify. I spoke about my relationship with Rose, about wearing the ring when I missed her, about the comfort it brought me, even when I thought it was worthless. I testified about my research into Elena's story and my decision to honor the tradition of guardianship rather than pursue financial gain. Miss Chen, what do you plan to do with the ring if you're allowed to keep it? I want to continue researching its history. Dr. Martinez and Professor Hartwell Morrison have suggested that it could be the centerpiece of an exhibit about women entrepreneurs in early Colorado. I'd like to loan it to museums so people can learn about Elena's story and the history it represents. And the financial value? The financial value is less important to me than the historical value. This ring represents 5 generations of women who understood that some treasures can't be measured in dollars. During Madison's legal team's cross-examination, they tried to paint me as naive and financially irresponsible, but their questions only reinforced the central point. I valued the ring for reasons that had nothing to do with money, while Madison's interest was purely financial. Judge Hawkins recessed for deliberation, and we waited in the courthouse hallway for 2 hours. Madison and her supporters clustered on one side, while Dorothy, Janet, and I sat quietly on the other. The reporters peppered both sides with questions that we politely declined to answer. When court reconvened, Judge Hawkins looked stern and decisive. This case presents a conflict between financial interest and testamentary intent. The plaintiff argues that the decedent was mentally incapacitated when she made her will, but the evidence doesn't support this claim. Mrs. Rose Chen's medical records, financial management, and detailed planning demonstrate mental clarity throughout her final years. She paused, looking directly at Madison. Furthermore, the plaintiff's own testimony reveals that her current interest in this ring is entirely based on its appraised value. She has admitted to repeatedly mocking and ridiculing the ring when she believed it was worthless. This court finds it difficult to accept that someone who called an item garbage has a legitimate claim to inherit it simply because it turned out to be valuable. Madison's face flushed red, and I saw her father put a restraining hand on her arm as she started to rise from her chair. The historical evidence presented by Professor Hartwell Morrison demonstrates that Mrs. Chen was following a well-established family tradition of matrilineal inheritance. This wasn't a random decision, but the continuation of a 170-year-old pattern established by the ring's original owner. Judge Hawkins shuffled her papers and delivered her final ruling. The court finds that Rose Chen was mentally competent when she executed her will, that her request was deliberate and informed, and that the defendant has demonstrated the kind of stewardship and appreciation that the decedent clearly intended. The plaintiff's motion to invalidate the bequest is denied.
The gavel came down with finality. Madison's legal team immediately huddled to discuss an appeal, but I could see the defeat in their faces. The case had been thoroughly decided against them. As we left the courthouse, reporters tried to get statements from both sides. Madison pushed past them without comment, her face a mask of barely controlled rage. I simply said that I was grateful the court had honored my grandmother's wishes and looked forward to sharing the ring's historical significance with the public. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within a week, Madison had fired her legal team and announced she was dropping any appeal plans. The family fragmented completely. Some relatives apologized for joining the lawsuit, others simply stopped speaking to me entirely. My parents sent a formal letter through their attorney stating they respected the court's decision but were, quote, disappointed in the outcome. Dorothy, however, was thrilled. "Rose would be so proud of you," she told me during our celebration lunch. "You stood up for what was right, even when your own family turned against you." 6 months later, I stood in the Colorado History Museum next to a beautiful exhibit case containing the Maharaja's moon. The ring was displayed alongside Elena's photographs, Captain Hartwell's journals, and a detailed explanation of its journey from British India to Denver. Thousands of visitors had already seen it, learning about the remarkable women who had preserved this piece of history across 5 generations.
The exhibition placard read, "On loan from the Elena Morrison Hartwell Collection, courtesy of Leslie Chen, in memory of Rose Chen, 1931-2024, who understood that true inheritance is measured not in dollars, but in the wisdom to preserve what matters most for those who come after us." Madison never came to see the exhibit. We haven't spoken since the courthouse steps that snowy December day. Sometimes I wonder if she truly understood what she lost, not just the money, but the connection to our family's remarkable history, the respect of our grandmother, and the relationship with a sister who had once looked up to her. As for me, I continue to research Elena's story and the other families connected to the 7 rings. I've been contacted by descendants of the other recipients, and we're working together to document the complete history of the Maharaja's diplomatic gifts. The ring itself remains in museum storage most of the time, carefully climate-controlled and secured. But occasionally, on quiet Sunday afternoons when I'm missing Grandma Rose particularly strongly, the museum allows me to hold it for a few minutes. In those moments, feeling its familiar weight in my palm, I understand exactly why she chose me. It was never about the money. It was about being worthy of the trust that Elena, Rose, and 5 generations of remarkable women had placed in whoever would come next. Some treasures can't be bought, sold, or divided among family members seeking quick profit. Some treasures can only be preserved by those who understand their true value. 2 years after the courtroom victory, I received a phone call that would change everything once again. Dr. Amanda Richardson from the Smithsonian's National Museum of Natural History was on the line, and her voice barely contained excitement. "Miss Chen, we've been following your ring story through Professor Hartwell Morrison's research. We'd like to propose something extraordinary, a complete exhibition about the 7 Maharaja rings and their global diaspora. Your ring would be the centerpiece, but we've located 3 of the other surviving rings and their fascinating stories." The Smithsonian exhibition, titled Diplomatic Gifts, 7 Rings, 7 Destinies, opened 18 months later to international acclaim. My ring was displayed alongside the Swiss collector's ring and the British Museum's piece, plus detailed recreations of the 4 lost rings based on historical descriptions. But the real revelation came from the stories of the other families. The Swiss ring had been sold by desperate descendants during World War II to finance their escape from Nazi Germany. The British Museum ring had been donated by a family who'd lost their fortune in the 1929 stock market crash and needed the tax deduction. Each ring told a story of families who'd chosen financial survival over historical preservation. Mine was the only ring that had remained with its original family line, the only one that still carried its complete provenance and story. Elena's decision to hide its value had inadvertently made it the most historically significant of all 7 pieces. The exhibition drew visitors from around the world, including several unexpected guests.
Professor Hartwell Morrison brought his elderly aunt, Margaret Hartwell Sinclair, who turned out to be the last living person who remembered family stories about Captain Hartwell's service in India. My great-grandfather always said Edmund was the wisest of the Hartwell brothers, she told me over tea in the museum cafe. He said Edmund understood that true treasure wasn't gold or gems, but the wisdom to know when to hold on and when to let go. The most surprising visitor was Dr. Rajesh Krishnamurthy, a historian from Mysore who'd been researching the original diplomatic mission that had produced the rings. He brought photographs and documents from Indian archives that filled in gaps in a story I'd never known existed. The Maharaja of Mysore chose these specific stones for a reason, he explained, showing me 19th century Sanskrit texts. In our tradition, gray diamonds represent wisdom that appears ordinary to those who cannot see clearly, but reveals extraordinary truth to those with proper vision. The Maharaja had been making a statement about British-Indian relations, giving gifts that appeared modest but were actually priceless, a metaphor for the hidden value of understanding between cultures. Your ancestor Elena understood this symbolism perfectly. By preserving the ring in secret, she honored both its British diplomatic significance and its Indian spiritual meaning. During the exhibition's 6-month run, I gave lectures about Elena's story and the importance of preserving family history. These talks led to something unexpected: invitations to speak at genealogy conferences, historical societies, and universities about the intersection of family heritage and historical preservation. I took a sabbatical from the library to pursue this new calling, traveling across the country to share Elena's story and encourage others to investigate their own family mysteries.
Response was overwhelming. I received hundreds of letters from people who'd discovered their own hidden treasures in attics, safety deposit boxes, and forgotten family storage. One letter particularly moved me. A woman named Patricia Hendricks from Maine wrote, "Your story inspired me to ask my 89-year-old grandmother about a strange necklace she always wore. It turns out it contains a locket with a photograph of her grandmother, who was a suffragette who marched with Susan B. Anthony. We never knew we had this incredible family history because no one ever asked the right questions." But the most meaningful development happened closer to home. Dorothy, now 94 and still sharp as ever, decided to write her own memoirs about growing up with Rose and their family's early years in Colorado. Her stories revealed details about Rose's life that I'd never heard: her quiet acts of charity during the Depression, her work with immigrant families learning English, her decades-long correspondence with Elena's descendants in England. "Your grandmother was special long before that ring came into the picture," Dorothy told me as we worked on her manuscript. "Rose understood that some people collect money, but the wisest people collect stories." Through Dorothy's memories, I learned that Rose had actually been contacted by an antique dealer in the 1970s who'd somehow heard rumors about the ring. He'd offered to buy it for what was then a substantial sum, enough to pay off her house and live comfortably for her remaining years. "Rose showed me his letter," Dorothy recalled. "She laughed and said, 'Some fool thinks I don't know what I have. But he's wrong. I know exactly what I have, and it's not for sale.'" This story crystallized something I'd been thinking about for months. Rose hadn't just known about the ring's monetary value, she'd actively protected it from people who would have reduced it to a simple financial transaction. The success of the Smithsonian exhibition led to an even bigger opportunity. The BBC contacted me about participating in a documentary series called Hidden Histories: Family Treasures That Changed Everything. The episode about the Maharaja rings would trace the complete story from the 1847 diplomatic mission to the present day. Filming took place across 3 continents: in India at the Maharaja's palace, in England at the archives where Captain Hartwell's military records were kept, and in Colorado at the sites where Elena had built her life. Standing in the remains of Elena's boarding house basement, now part of a downtown Denver parking garage, I felt the weight of history in a way I'd never experienced before. The documentary aired to massive international audiences and won several awards for historical storytelling. But more importantly, it sparked a global conversation about the difference between inheriting wealth and inheriting responsibility.
I started receiving invitations to speak at estate planning conferences, where lawyers and financial advisors wanted to understand how families could pass down values along with valuables. The legal profession was grappling with increasing numbers of inheritance disputes, like Madison's lawsuit, and they were searching for better ways to help families navigate these challenges. Your grandmother did something remarkable. One estate attorney told me after a presentation in Chicago, she didn't just leave you something valuable, she left you a test of character. Most people fail that test. You passed it beautifully. As my speaking career grew, I made a decision that surprised even myself. I left my position at the Denver Public Library permanently and founded the Elena Morrison Hartwell Foundation, dedicated to helping families research and preserve their own hidden histories. The foundation's work became my life's mission. We helped people trace genealogies, research family artifacts, and most importantly, document the stories that might otherwise be lost when elderly relatives passed away. Our motto, taken from Elena's letter, became "True wealth lies not in what we own, but in what we choose to preserve for those who come after us." One of our most successful programs paired elderly people with young volunteers who interviewed them about family history and recorded their stories for future generations. We called it the Rose Chen Memory Project, and it grew to include participants in 12 states. Through this work, I discovered something remarkable. Almost every family has hidden treasures, whether they're valuable artifacts, important documents, or simply stories that reveal extraordinary courage and resilience in ordinary people's lives. Madison, meanwhile, had largely disappeared from public view. I heard through mutual acquaintances that her marriage to Trevor had ended in a bitter divorce 2 years after the court case. She'd moved to California and was working for a different investment firm, apparently having burned too many bridges in Denver's financial community. Our parents eventually reached out through Dorothy, expressing regret about the lawsuit and hoping for some kind of reconciliation. But their overtures came with conditions. They wanted me to acknowledge that the legal fight had been unfortunate for everyone and that both sides had made mistakes. I declined their invitation to family therapy. Some broken relationships can't be repaired with comfortable compromises that ignore fundamental differences in values. Madison had shown me who she really was during those months of legal warfare, and our parents had revealed their own priorities by supporting her attack on Rose's memory. Dorothy, however, remained a constant source of wisdom and support. On her 95th birthday, she gave me a gift that brought tears to my eyes: a handwritten recipe book that had belonged to Elena, discovered in a trunk Dorothy had inherited from Rose but never fully examined. Elena's recipe book was filled with annotations and stories, little glimpses into her daily life as she built her boarding house business, but the most precious discovery was a loose page. Tucked between recipes for bread and soup, a letter Elena had written but never sent to her sister in England. "I often think of the ring Edmund gave me," Elena had written, "not because of its value in pounds or shillings, but because it reminds me that some gifts come with obligations. I am not just keeping it safe, I am keeping safe the story it tells, the trust Edmund placed in me, and the responsibility to pass both forward to someone who will understand." Reading Elena's words felt like receiving a message across 170 years of family history. She had understood exactly what I was learning, that inheriting something precious means accepting the responsibility to be worthy of that trust. As I write this, 3 years have passed since Judge Hawkins ruled in my favor. The Elena Morrison Hartwell Foundation has helped over 2,000 families discover and preserve their own hidden histories. The Maharaja's ring continues to tour museums internationally, sharing its story with new audiences and inspiring others to investigate their own family mysteries. I never did reconcile with Madison, though I sometimes wonder what might have happened if she'd made different choices during those crucial months. Could she have understood the ring's true value if she'd approached it with curiosity instead of greed? Could our family have remained intact if she'd respected Rose's wishes instead of challenging them in court? That those questions belong to a different story, one where different people made different choices. In this story, the real story, Elena chose wisdom over wealth, Rose chose character over convenience, And I learned that some treasures can only be preserved by those who understand that their true value cannot be measured in dollars. The ring itself rests tonight in the Smithsonian's vault, carefully climate controlled and secured. But its real treasure, the story it tells about love, sacrifice, wisdom, and the courage to honor the trust placed in us by those who came before, that treasure lives on in everyone who learns Elena's story and decides to become worthy of the gifts they've inherited. Some treasures, I've learned, grow more valuable each time they're shared, and that may be the most precious inheritance of all. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.